So for the most part, hand traps are not always the kind of cards you always want to have on your deck list. They always depend on which decks people choose to play. Of course, there are some exceptions like Ash and Imperm that you pretty much always want to have in your deck when you want to play hand traps. But when it comes to more specific hand traps, you really have to be careful. Let's start with arguably one of the most popular hand traps out there, which would be Nibiru. Nibiru is only really good against decks that really need to special summon a bunch of times on their own turn and can't really get a negation very early on. This goes without saying, but obviously Nibiru is really bad against trap decks or, slow-paced mid-range decks that don't really need to special summon 5 or more times in a turn. What I find funny is that Nibiru kind of got worse because the decks that actually used to lose to Nibiru got nerfed on the ban list. For example, Nibiru used to be pretty good against Kashtira because that deck used to special summon a lot on turn 1 if they went with the Diablosis route, but nowadays people are really just going to be going Kashtira Rise Hard Pass. And of course, if they can summon a big threat with only 4 summons, you're gonna look at your Nibiru and you're gonna be really disappointed. As for Super Heavy Samurai, Nibiru used to be really weak against them because they used to be able to turbo out Baronne de Fleur very early on in their combo with only one single card. Now the deck got way worse because the Link one is no longer a thing, so the combo is still possible, but they need more than one card in order to not only play around Nibiru, but also full combo. And there are also a bunch of decks that really do not care about Nibiru at all. I'm talking about Labyrinth, Runic Stun, Sky Striker, Vanquish Soul, and even Sprite if they choose to turbo out Gigantic very early on. Even Purely and Dragon Link don't really lose too hard to Nibiru in case they cater their playstyle around it. And even though Nibiru might be resolving against Mathmech and Despia, it's not gonna resolve with like a huge impact. Overall, I really recommend not main decking Nibiru and maybe side deck it instead until at least you get to see what people are playing this format. So next up would be another hand trap that saw a lot of resurgence last format, and that would be Droll and Logbird. Droll was pretty insane against Super Heavy Samurai because every single time you drilled them, they kind of had to go Baguska Pass, and it's also relatively decent against other decks. Although I will say, the existence and also prominence of Cyframe Gear Gamma definitely made Droll way worse. Because of the fact that a lot of people actually main deck 3 Gamma last format, if you drolled under an empty board, they could Gamma, so not only negate the Droll, but also summon Omega on your ass. And you can argue that this is something you no longer really have to worry about because Cyframe Gear Gamma is now limited, so people aren't really down to play that card anymore, and since people are not playing Gamma, then Droll can safely resolve every single time on an empty board. And perhaps this could justify its existence in today's metagame, but I would still be skeptical. Droll is honestly pretty weak against decks that can search on the draw phase, and there are a few. So for example, the Runic deck can actually search the field spell with the Huggin using pretty much any Runic spell card on draw phase. Despia could use Branded Opening to special summon the Aluber and then get a search for the Branded Fusion, and also get the search of Despian Tragedy when they discard it for Branded Opening. So that would be 2 searches under the Droll that you can't use because it's draw phase, and after that they don't really need any further searches from their deck. And the Purely deck can either use Sleepy or Pretty Memory to special summon a cat during the draw phase on an empty board and then get like a search or an excavate depending on which cat they summon. The Mathmech deck could also simultaneously search the Superfactorial as well as the Diameter with the Circular and Alambertian, but at the same time they do have to hard draw Circular for that. And again, Vanquish Soul and Labyrinth really do not care about Droll because for the most part they only really need to search once or maybe sometimes twice in a turn. Overall, I'd say you have to keep an eye out on Droll and Logbird, but only play it if you know for a fact that people play decks that really lose big time to it. Don't blindly main deck this card is what I'm trying to say. The final hand trap I want to cover would be Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. This is usually one of the most unique hand traps as it's either really broken or complete dog shit. Back when the Pendulum Turbo deck used to be a thing, it was insane against Electrum because it was pretty much like a negate and destroy in a way because it didn't really matter if they could send a Pendulum monster from deck to extra deck if their Electrum died. Nowadays, a lot of monsters are completely immune to destruction, or destroying them doesn't really matter too much, you really want to be negating them. With that being said, Ghost Ogre is still pretty good against 2 kinds of cards. The first ones would be Link monsters that can only special summon monsters exactly to the zone they point to. And then after that, continuous spell cards or trap cards that can only really resolve when they are still face up on the field, so continuous or field spells or pendulum skills. Oh wow, what a coincidence! The Super Heavy Samurai has both of these flaws. Ogre really hurts a lot against Super Heavy Samurai Prodigy Wakoshi, Big Banky, and also the Link 1 monster, but again, that is no longer a thing. With that being said, it doesn't always have the best applications. It's kinda dogshit against Kashtira because nothing guarantees you that it'll always do something, and if you're holding it for the birth, maybe they're going to be summoning a Rise Art first, or maybe use a Shifter. And I say that because Ogre isn't worded the exact same way as Ash. You actually have to be sending the Ogre from the hand or field to the graveyard in order to use it, whereas Ash, you just have to discard it. So in other words, if cards are banished instead of going to the graveyard, you are not legally allowed to use Ogre, Veiler, or DD Crow. Obviously, Ogre is really bad against Despia and Trap decks in general. It's honestly pretty nice against Purely because not only can you Ogre the level 1 monster when they try to Xyz summon, or you can Ogre the continuous spell card. But to be fair, Purely is also seeing way less play right now than it used to before, so I don't really think this justifies its existence. And I like to say that Ogre is really mid against rogue decks, and finding the optimal timing for it is really awkward. Overall, I'm not a super big fan of Ogre this format, even though I actually really like Ogre as a card, and it's one of my favorite hand traps in the entire game, if not my favorite. Anyways, that's all I had to say for this video. So tomorrow I will be back with some more interesting and spicy tags that you can play in your deck in order to steal games next format. So make sure you're tuned for all my upcoming videos. As always, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.